Another week of the preseason is in the books, and that means there is a lot of news and notes about the rookies of the 2026 draft class floating around the Dynasty atmosphere. We're here to break down some of our favorite topics, some key decisions, some things that we care about, and some things that we might not. So sit tight, lock in. You're getting the Dynasty Points Rookie Report, and it starts right now. Guys, between injuries, lawsuits, odd potential cut candidates already, players waived that had so much promise, I'm ready for week one. Unfortunately, to get there, we have to go through a little bit more preseason, but that allows us to shed some light on some of these rookies for better or worse. Of course, if you're drafting right now, you need to get into the Fantasy Points front office. You can do that with promo code FPFO. Get 15% off. You get to sync all of your leagues, have all of this wonderful information that you see here about each one of your Dynasty teams, how it can help out in real time as news shows up. FPFO, it has made Dynasty a lot easier for me and many of our subscribers. And of course, get into the Discord. We're there all day, every day, giving you one-on-one feedback. Well, we had our first incident, guys, where a rookie running back who we were hopeful would go to a team with opportunity becomes the backup. He might get to play. Well, I was at a baseball tournament when I got the Jeanty news, and I almost fell to the ground screaming. And then I saw Jakob immediately post on thinking it. I went, oh no, it's real. The news is real, before I got to check, and I wondered why I already had 4 trade offers when I checked my sleeper account that involved Mike Washington. And that led me to think, and now we've got the Ken Walker news that came today. We're recording this on the 25th. That's the Tuesday. So when you're hearing this, it'll be the 26th or later. We get to talk about Emmitt Johnson in this regard as well. I'm of the belief that you need to acquire these guys before the injury happens. When they happen, the player that has drafted these guys or traded for these guys, this is what they were waiting for the whole time. I went and checked the ADP. Mike Washington ended up going and is going in the 3rd round. And now you're getting trade offers that required 27 seconds, which were held in higher regard than 26 seconds. So guys, let's talk about how you're approaching these guys, how you would approach them moving forward. Because, well, the one scares, it is just a scare. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. So Jakob, I'll kick to you. Mike Washington, Emmitt Johnson, kind of how do you approach this?
So I want to split up the specific and the general a little bit. So on the specific point, it was a whirlwind on Sunday. It felt for a few hours that the most likely scenario was that Ashton Jeanty had potentially suffered like a multi-ligament tear that would end his season and put his career in jeopardy based on the way that the injury was described. And then we get the notification a few hours later that night that, okay, it's just a sprained ankle. The reporting on the sprained ankle has continued to be weird. It's apparently more low than high. Clint Kubiak won't offer any form of official update today at the press conference. Whatever. It seems clear that the range of outcomes is somewhere between Jeanty plays week 1 at best, Jeanty misses a few weeks, and maybe has a slightly delayed return to performance at worst. That's a very different picture than what we were looking at for this backfield on Sunday, and obviously it's a very different outcome for Mike Washington and what his upside potentially is this season than it looked like it was going to be on Sunday. That being said, the general take is I guess I would push back on what you're saying a little here. I mean, I'm not against the idea of drafting backup running backs in rookie drafts. I'm very much in favor of that idea, in fact. It's something I love doing in the 3rd round of rookie drafts. I'm almost always scooping up a lot of these backups, and I have a decent amount of Mike Washington from the 3rd round of my rookie drafts. But I definitely think that we should not be attached to what the cost of a player was when the circumstances change dramatically. And I mean, if Ashton Jeanty had suffered a season-ending injury or a season-altering injury, the circumstances would change dramatically. I think that there were, at the time, very different reasons why you may have drafted Mike Washington in round 3. You may have genuinely loved Mike Washington as a college prospect. You may just ideologically prefer drafting backup running backs versus dart throw wide receivers in that range or tight ends. You may have Ashton Jeanty and you just wanted a handcuff. Who knows why you made that pick? Who knows how your view of Mike Washington has been altered over the course of watching him look really strong during the preseason. And who knows where you fall compared to other people. There might be someone else in your league who loved Mike Washington coming out of college, was super excited about him, and was surprised and disappointed that he fell to day 3 of the draft into a spot where he had no realistic chance of earning a starting role. But then, and maybe that person is not the type to go and attack running backs in rookie drafts. So they went and they drafted insert wide receiver here, that has maybe a more plausible path to standalone snaps. But now Mike Washington has a chance, or at least looked like he would have a chance to become a starting running back for the year. And maybe these Mike Washington truthers come back out of the woodwork and are much more intrigued by this opportunity. There's a bunch of different aspects to every single player's value that changes from the talent profile and the situation and all of that. And so to me, we can't predict what's going to happen. And when a massive change to a player's circumstances happens, I think you should completely reevaluate things. If you're the highest person in your league on Mike Washington, just because you didn't happen to grab them when they were the backup to Ashton Jeanty, if now the situation is Mike Washington starting running back, or even Mike Washington starting running back for a few games with the chance to impress, if you think you're the highest person in your league on his talent profile, then go buy. I don't think it's necessarily some sucker move to buy higher than a player was drafted when the situation is completely different than what the situation was previously. So anyways, that's my kind of macro take on these guys. Washington specifically, I have a pretty mixed view on. The analytical profile, really rough. 5-year prospect, was not very efficient until the last year. Still a mixed bag in the last year. Really athletic guy. I personally quite liked the tape. I thought he had the 3rd best tape in the class of the running backs that I watched. So I was kind of in and out on him. And then I was kind of happy that he fell to day 3 and that he was a guy we could scoop in round 3 of rookie drafts rather than a guy we had to go and pay a premium for at the 1-2 turn. So I would consider myself cautiously optimistic. You also do have the upside of, I think Ashton Jeanty is still going to miss some time, which means Mike Washington probably gets a week 1 start against the Miami Dolphins. That's the kind of opportunity for him to leave a lasting imprint in the minds of dynasty managers that could last literally years of what type of tantalizing upside Mike Washington has, even if you don't actually see him in a starting role for the rest of the season if Jeanty comes back.
I love the way you just laid that out, Jacob, because I feel like I'm sort of on the exact opposite end of all of those possible places that you could be with Mike Washington, kind of at every point through that you just described. So for me, I was almost rooting for him to fall to day 3, not because I was thinking, wow, I can scoop up so much of him. For me, it was more, I just have no interest in this profile really, and I don't want to have to contend with the idea of what if a team just decides to install him as their starter, when that did look possible for a while in the pre-draft process where he was being routinely mocked to day 2. This was one of the running backs that people were mocking to the Seahawks, that people were mocking to these very open backfields, the Commanders, all of them. So I kind of was a little scared of what Washington could turn into, just in terms of, I really hate having to take stands on these running backs where I have little to no kind of belief in the talent, but the opportunity is very much going to be there. So it looked like I got off of having to even think or worry about Mike Washington for a while. And now that's come back up, right? So I kind of fall on the end of, I don't think Washington is that talented of a running back, but hey, untalented running backs as you make a great point to say, have scored a lot of fantasy points, especially in 1 to 2 to 3 week samples. So I do think it's not as simple for me to look at my pre-draft evaluation of Mike Washington now and say, well, he'll probably just fail in week 1 and week 2, and then he'll probably just go away and we'll never hear from him again or have to worry about him again. I think that is like eliminating an outcome that from my mind that absolutely could happen. So where I'm at on Mike Washington, on Emmitt Johnson, I think with the way that the injury reporting has lined up as we record right now for Ashton Jeanty and for Ken Walker, for whom we know literally nothing about his injury. We know he's missing practice with a foot injury today. He could literally be back tomorrow. We could not even remember this 2 weeks from now.
Yeah, this is a pre-recorded show, so if you're listening to this on Wednesday, August 26th, it's very possible that you know more than we do. We're recording this 1 p.m. Pacific time, Tuesday, August 25th. All we know is he has a foot injury. Like, he could have a broken foot, or he could have like a blister on his toe. Like, both of those are equally possible right now.
Yeah. So thank you for giving me, my pre-caveats before anything I'm about to say. That's all very, very important. But to me, I'm looking at this right now as there's a pretty decent chance that Ashton Jeanty misses at least one game. Maybe Ken Walker will miss one game. If it's not early in the season, Ken Walker does have a tendency to miss games. This would not be the most shocking thing for Ken Walker, just looking at his career, right? So while it's important to say, okay, we know there's a higher chance Jeanty is going to miss a game and that it could come earlier in the season, to me, if I compare him to a Washington, to another handcuff like an Emmitt Johnson, I think I still am inclined to lean toward an Emmitt Johnson because I liked him more as a prospect, because I see him as just having like a more complete or closer to every down role for any game that Walker does miss, where with Johnson, I was more impressed by him as a pass catcher. Funnily enough, like his advanced rushing metrics were just largely better than Mike Washington's. His were some of the worst I've ever seen, which is like really weird relative to how he looks on the field and how fast he is and all that. Like the missed tackles forced, all of those stats were just like not there for Washington. They at least were more so for an Emmitt Johnson. So with me, I still am going to prefer an Emmitt Johnson. I had him ranked higher than Washington in rookie drafts. I would take Johnson now from a dynasty context where I am saying, openly admitting I'm zooming out, just kind of thinking both of these backs could miss games this year. Both guys could get similar opportunities to kind of audition to the attention of dynasty managers in terms of their skill, in terms of their ability to take over a backfield for a game. I'm still backing Emmitt Johnson in that contest, but this is one that could totally look foolish after week 1 for months and months and months. Emmitt may never get an opportunity. So it is a really tough one. Maybe against my best interests, I'm a little more inclined to cling to at least the profile priors of what I thought of the player before the thing we thought could happen, which is that the starter gets injured, actually happens.
Yeah, at this point, I probably like Johnson more in Dynasty as well. You mentioned some of Washington's metrics. It's a weird profile. So he did have some of the best explosive run rates in the class, so the breakaway stuff was there. But yeah, you mentioned the missed tackles forced rate was brutal. So there's an interesting degree with him where, despite being very large, I feel like he goes down on first contact a concerningly high amount. I do think there's some untapped receiving upside, just from a tape watching perspective with him. I do think Johnson is a much more conventional fantasy upside bet. Assuming that the Walker injury is not that meaningful, and assuming that the Jeanty injury is no more than a couple of games, like, yeah, I would prefer to back Emmitt Johnson, who's the guy that I had a tier higher in my rookie rankings. But we'll certainly see how this goes. I suspect with what happened with Jeanty now, the Washington becomes a player that's like just like becomes illiquid, where if Jeanty was out for the season, I think you'd see a ton of Mike Washington trades because people would have very different interpretations of what that means. But at this point, like, if you have Mike Washington, how much are you really going to get? No one's trading you a first-round pick because Jeanty's going to miss a couple of games with a sprained ankle. And are people even giving 27 seconds anymore? I don't know. I'd probably take it at this point if someone wanted to give me a 27-second, because of a couple of games that Ashton Jeanty might miss. Maybe that's possible. But otherwise, like, probably what's going to happen is people are like, I don't want to pay anything for Mike Washington just because Jeanty might miss 2 games. And if you have Mike Washington, you go, okay, well, great. I get to start him against the Miami Dolphins, and hopefully he scores me a lot of points, and then he'll go back to being, what he was already, which is an interesting handcuff. I do think there's like some chance he could carve out a non-startable role in fantasy at all. But like, if he looks fantastic for 2 weeks, maybe he's able to carve out a role that is irritating for Ashton Jeanty and like gives him enough carries to look good to keep him in dynasty managers' memories going into the offseason. If he gets like 6 to 8 carries a game instead of 2 to 4, that stuff can matter at the margins for value.
Yeah, it's the Braylon Allen effect, right? Like, same kind of thing. But while you mention it, we've got a trade just from today is Chris Rodriguez and Mike Washington for Jacoby Lane and a 27-second, which is nothing considering it's a 26th third that you were using to draft him. He was involved in a Rashid Shaheed Laporta trade that also netted a player a 27-1, so kind of used as a throw-in to upgrade to a 1. Then you get this one, Adam Randall and Mike Washington from the 24th for a 28 first and a 27 third. And that's just the kind of deal that I'm saying, like, there is a point where you have to be more responsible with the situation having changed to not tip your head so far over the skis on the initial news, which is where the initial price still matters to me a little bit. Like, I couldn't justify spending 4x just because we might get a couple. Like, when we figured out where these guys went in the NFL draft, we kind of knew what needed to happen for them to hit, really, like more, like at probably 90+%. So there's just kind of a way to maybe be more prepared, let's say, as dynasty managers, and less reactionary to the point where you have to pay so much more because, again, a lot of dynasty managers want to draft these guys when we know where they're going to up that price. So that's where I sit on the side of it. There is a I'll say responsible point of value.
Just one more kind of actionable point that you just reminded me of, Tom, that I think we've talked about this before, but it bears worth repeating now that it's August. Just overall, when you're managing a dynasty team, you should be a little bit less reactive and more concerned with making mistakes and mitigating big downside, I think, than I would say that about any other format in fantasy football. So over the weekend, if you were plugged into Twitter, you may have seen screenshots of people getting Ashton Jeanty in high stakes redraft fantasy football leagues at very, very appealing costs. He was falling. Jacob, I know, drafted him in round 4 in a big gorilla. I saw him going in round 6, round 8 on FFPC. Like that was happening. Good for those people. That's a format where it is one entry. The league only lasts for 1 year. All the money is in the grand prize up top. You should be shooting for upside and be okay with burning an entry or, setting a team on fire when we don't know what the news is. That's always a format where I'm willing to take risks, right? In Dynasty, I think there's almost no point to trying to trade off of breaking news from an hour ago where we don't know whether Ashton Jeanty is going to play most games or any games this year. I would just rather back myself in Dynasty when we all have all of the information. I'd just rather back myself to make the right decisions with that rather than gambling on hopefully I guess right when nobody actually knows what the case is for these players and for the injuries. I just think in that format where the downside chases you year after year after year, if you sent your 28 first or whatever future draft capital or players that could have been redeemed for future draft capital, your decisions follow you for years in Dynasty. And I would just always rather make them with the fullest information possible rather than lean into, yeah, maybe I can get a super team here if I'm lucky, but like if I don't, I'm stuck with this Dynasty team for the next few years that I just gambled away off of a lack of information.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Like that was my advice for the brief window of time when we didn't know that much, was like, either whether you're trading for Washington or you're trading for Jeanty, like just take the conservative assumption with whoever you're trading for. Like assume the absolute worst for whatever player you're trading for when we're in uncertain news. Back yourself as a dynasty manager. Like believe that you can build a good dynasty manager or build a good dynasty team over time, like without putting your team status in injury roulette of like, well, I'm going to bet on this player with a completely unknown injury and like hope that I get good news, or bad news, I guess, if you were trading for Mike Washington. Like that to me is like a silly way to play Dynasty. It's a way to play Dynasty that honestly like displays a lack of confidence in your ability to build a team without just praying for good luck. So I mean, I'm not saying you can't buy low on injured guys, but I would make sure you're buying really low on injured guys and not like just kind of trying to halves it while nobody knows what the injury is. Like I think just take a pause for the cause on that one and probably build it the old-fashioned way.
Talk about another hotly discussed player. Last week we talked about the Omar Cooper playing behind Isaiah Williams. And lo and behold, Omar Cooper plays ahead of Isaiah Williams this week, preseason week 2. Now, we had a very kind of back and forth discussion. The comment section was kind of one side or the other with the Stribling and Cooper conversation. My opinion hasn't changed, but Jacob, I want you to talk about the Omar Cooper thing. This kind of stuff happens every preseason where we seem to latch on to the first early bit of news and let it kind of run wild. So where do you stand with this and the outlook, let's say, for Dynasty moving forward?
I'm going to pitch it to Ryan after very brief comments because I think he has a rant prepared, but I don't know. Like to me, like if we are going, it's one thing, if when we talk about the Mike Washington conversation, it's like, again, let's assume that Ashton Jeanty was out for the season. That would be a massive shift in how we view Mike Washington. We should recalibrate. But like, and there's room certainly for like gathering more optimism on certain players that have really strong camp buzzes, like, to a point. But if you're going to like move someone drastically down the board, especially, or swap them with players that were in completely different tiers before you've even seen a singular regular season snap of a guy, then I guess like just find something else to do from March to July. Because like, what's the point of investing all that time in like talking about these prospects if one preseason game where Omar Cooper is behind Isaiah Williams is like going to drastically change how you view Omar Cooper? Like, I don't know, if you didn't like Omar Cooper before, then you shouldn't like him now. And if you liked him before, I'd probably fucking relax.
That caps off like most of the rant that I was going to go with. I think really my thing is every single year there are preseason storylines that people become very invested in. And rookie is playing behind veteran that we've never really cared about in fantasy and probably isn't that good early in August is like one of the most recurring ones that basically has almost never actually turned out to matter. Now, it matters if it never changes, but it changed in a pretty timely fashion. Omar Cooper got ahead of Isaiah Williams to where he should have been, just like Justin Jefferson and BC Johnson all of those years ago, right? So I mean, maybe I'm just talking to nobody. Maybe nobody fell for this whatsoever, and nobody like needs this advice. But if you fell for that, if that like massively changed your opinion on Cooper, yeah, I would echo what Jacob said. I think either just I would even extend it, find something else to do from January through September 1st so that you don't give yourself the opportunity to like make mistakes during the like fire hose of August news, or spend even more time like developing your takes and your opinions in January through July, because I do think that the stronger and like better reasoned and more thought out your take on a player is, the more difficult it's going to be for kind of an in the moment news item to shake that. And in my experience, that is usually a good thing in August in the Dynasty format, to not allow your views of players to get radically altered. And if that's easier for you, if you spend even more time digging into prospects, consume even more content on the prospects, however that is that you do it, I would recommend it, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, every year, Justin Jefferson can't separate, Jamar Chase can't catch a football.
Sorry, you have to remember that every August, the people that have not been around football for the last 6 months all come back. So if you're one of the people that's like been with us through the entire year, you should instantly be able to spot the people on Twitter that have not been around for the last 6 months, because that's the type of stuff that they tweet and that they get really worked up about. And I think it becomes a skill to filter that out, I think.
It's also important.
And I was just gonna say that like it's not like it's nothing. Like you obviously would prefer to have strong preseason reports than not. But I just think that we do, like, everyone can bring up the different anecdotes in any single direction, right? So like Treylon Burks was a guy who had pretty bad preseason reports, and obviously he became a massive bust, and that's easy to remember in hindsight. Garrett Wilson was in the same class, and he played with backups as a first-round pick in his first preseason game, and he turned out to be very good. And like you can come up with examples of Puka Nacua as like a random guy who got a bunch of training camp buzz and obviously turned into a superstar, and you can come up with Darwin Thompson, who got a bunch of training camp buzz and is a like past and probably future 5 for 5 answer. Like, so I mean, every single player, you want to hear more good things than not. I would say on the whole, probably gets over-baked in more than it does get under-baked in, but like try to view every player, I guess, in their own vacuum as much as possible, is what I would say. But yeah, I mean, Cooper, like, this is a weird one, man. Like, he's going, like, we're Dynasty show, but like in seasonal leagues and stuff, like, the FFPC main event drafts are 20 rounds, and he's like regularly going undrafted. I've never really seen anything quite like that. It's bizarre.
Yeah, a little bit odd. I think it's just generally the take on that whole offense, or the whole projected offense. Maybe I don't know. But I will say another week, another big week for Stribling, let's say, and a new injury to Mike Williams. I think that is going to immediately kind of re-steam that conversation for a lot of people. We're
talking about Mike Evans, not Mike Williams, right?
Yes.
Making
sorry.
sure I'm not losing my mind.
Okay.
Yes. I don't know why I'm thinking about Mike Williams. Probably because we talked about him 5 for 5, and now he's just locked into my brain. But Mike Evans, right? Another injury to him, another setback. Again, it's just lining up for Stribling as well. We saw another heavy usage week for him. And after we talked last week about he's the type of player that you can get an early return on your investment. We're seeing around the industry the conversation of those 27 ones get brought up. We're already kind of... I have this feeling that if Stribling continues to get this kind of runway, there's the Kittle situation where he might not be playing week one. Christian McCaffrey is... I don't know if he's actually banged up or if he's, just like, you're good for the rest of the preseason, Christian. Just relax a little bit and we'll get you out there. But guys, there's a legit runway for like a nuclear takeoff with Stribling. And at that point, it's going to be hard to put that back in the bag, if you would. I'm very tempted to like kind of get out, but I don't know if I should be talked off the ledge for getting out if I can, or if he's just like, hey, if this hot start hits, it's a sustainable. We were all immediately wrong. It's one of those feelings, right? When we are off of a player, and then the situation has changed, and I'm like, wait, was I wrong the whole time? Should I just let this ride? Should I get out while I'm ahead? Serious conversation about a legitimate nuclear type takeoff.
I think the important process point on Stribling, or any player who has like this much of a hype train attached and is like such a hot topic, who probably a lot of people have very different valuations on, is to avoid the impulse to label someone as a buy or as a sell, and instead try to think of what is the price that I think is appropriate, set a price in your mind, and then be in active trade conversations regarding this player in as many leagues as possible. Because I would wager that if you pulled up the trade tool, that you would find a pretty wide spectrum of prices on what it costs to get Dejan Stribling. And I'm sure if you found 10 trades, I could find at least one or two where I like the Stribling side, and at least one or two that I don't. And the other thing I would stress from a process perspective is like we just said, like, try not to anchor yourself too much to the sunk cost fallacy. So if what you're telling me, you, Royal you, not like you, Tom, if someone tells me, okay, I don't want to buy Stribling for a first round pick right now because I don't think he was this great of a prospect, and et cetera, like, that sounds pretty reasonable to me. If someone is like, I don't want to buy Dejan Stribling for X price right now because his ADP was 210 4 months ago, like, I would say it might even be the right answer. I think it's a bad process. I don't think it really matters like what his cost was a couple months ago. I think we should evaluate him right now based on everything we know. That doesn't mean throwing out the prospect profile either and only evaluating the situation and the hype train. But I think we should take seriously that, the prospect profile, which is pretty rough, I still maintain, in addition to the draft capital, which is really positive, the offensive opportunity, which is really positive, the fact that Pearsall is out for the season in a way that he wasn't during rookie drafts, that Mike Evans is dealing with injuries in a way that he wasn't during rookie drafts, like, all that stuff is really positive. What he's looked like in preseason, really positive. I don't think it's like just the preseason stats either. I think like he looks legitimately impressive running routes. It's extremely strong hands. The way he's been able to win inside and outside on different routes has really impressed me. So I think it's totally fine to have like a very different opinion of a player today than you did in May. The question is like, is that opinion upgrade enough in context with what you think of his prospect profile to where you find yourself on the Stribling side of more trades than not? Like, I don't know. My personal outcome is probably the most boring one, which is if I could get a 27-1 or 28-1, I'm probably just doing that. That may look silly, but there are not a lot of wide receivers in the NFL that I think are worth more than like a first and a half. I'm looking like at my rankings. Let me pull them up right now. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 total that I have being worth more than a first and a half. So what are your chances of losing that deal really badly? I think small, right? Like, is he going to become one of the best 8 wide receivers in the NFL? Maybe, like Puka Nacua did, but probably not. And so I think that your chances of losing that deal big are pretty small. I definitely wouldn't sell for less than a first. I mean, why should you at this point? It doesn't really make sense to, in my opinion, and then you're opening yourself up to losing big. So that's probably where I land.
Yeah, I'm going to be in a similar area. I know that a week or two ago when I was on this show, I was giving a take that was similar to that, but with a second, right? Where I was saying very often the guys that are not really thought of or cared about as prospects in any significant way that start getting like out of nowhere camp buzz, specifically talking about like day 3 picks. I was saying it's very rare that they become worth that much more than a second, at least in their rookie years. That was my take on Cyrus Allen a week or two ago. And yeah, I think Jakob just laid out kind of a similar thought process for Stribling, but of course upgraded to, hey, this guy went 33rd overall and there is a much clearer opportunity here, and he has actually performed in the preseason games. It's at like all the other like things you want to pile on to Stribling, I think are fair in terms of upgrading kind of where that conversation begins. So yeah, I would be open to acquiring Stribling in Dynasty, in seasonal leagues. It just is very much going to come down to cost for me. And if we're just thinking of players to compare him to, I think one of the more helpful comparisons that I've landed on in either format is KC Concepcion, where you can say, all right, I want to be really in on this wide receiver that went in the late first to early second that is playing for a genius offensive play caller that could kind of surprise us in week 1 with how much he plays. Maybe he won't play a ton. Maybe he'll play a lot. Maybe he'll be very involved. Maybe he won't be. And he's absolutely destroyed the preseason and has just been a rocket ship in terms of positive reporting. And I think you can apply everything I just said to both KC Concepcion and DeJon Stribling. To me, the difference for Concepcion is that he was almost universally loved, I'd say, by like the film evaluators. And he was, I would say, more split for the numbers and analytics people was Concepcion's profile, but I count myself among the Concepcion believers from a numbers perspective. I know Jakob did as well, and a lot of people I respected as well. So comparing that to a Stribling where he was definitely like a trendy like film pick, and everyone always brings up, oh, he was going in the second in all the sharpest mock drafts, even before the draft, and that was true to some extent. He was genuinely like a trendy kind of riser guy. I never thought there was that much to the analytics profile. I won't speak for Jakob, but it sounds like he didn't either. So yeah, to me, there is still like a very clear difference in separation between somebody like DeJon Stribling versus KC Concepcion, even if you want to say, hey, Stribling is playing with a better quarterback this year. He's on what we expect to be a better offense, certainly. Then I think that's at least counteracted, if not even more like overruled or overtaken by, yeah, but we know Concepcion is starting in week 1, regardless of what we find out on the Wednesday injury report on September 8th about Mike Evans or George Kittle or Christian McCaffrey. Like I do know that Concepcion is going to at least be starting in 3 receiver sets for the Browns. That's every indication that we've gotten that's what he's earned. So I think from either a dynasty or a redraft perspective, if I'm just looking to roll into week 1 and see what happens, I still think that a Concepcion is in like a much stronger position than a DeJon Stribling is. But I mean, I'm very prepared for either of these guys to prove me wrong or to massively outshine the other, or for both to shine. Let's hope that happens.
Okay. I was really hoping this season was going to be different in Tennessee. I was not incredibly high on Cam Ward last year. It was one of the most contested conversations we had between us and chats and comment sections. Didn't look any better in week 2 of the preseason. I'm now very sad for all of my Wan'Dale Robinsons, but I'm increasingly sad for the Carnell Tate season. I had Carnell Tate as my wide receiver 1 of the class, not really a big shocker or a big, pounding of the chest, one of the few, but this looks like it could genuinely be a disaster with the way the season is shaping up. I've been trying to trade some of the Carnell Tates that I have to kind of move into some other wide receiver territory in and around where he is. I'm not sure where you guys are on that scale. Last week we had people when we were talking about Tyson and the injury and how it affects. We had people in the comment section asking us about trades for guys like Jameson Williams straight up, and some other trades in the Discord being passed around because they were concerned about the injury history and moving off them, etc. This isn't injury related. This is just purely situation related, and it looks quite horrendous, I think we can say, from this point. So I want to know where you guys are, what your outlook is. I think the situation can change very quickly. I mean, we see that with wide receivers who get stuck with poor quarterback play quite often, but I want out. If I have him on any team that I'm trying to score points for this year, I would love to hear where you guys are at.
I've moved Tate a bit down in redraft. I was never that much of a Tate guy. He was my pre-draft wide receiver 3. I guess he'd probably be my rookie wide receiver 1 in Dynasty rankings now, because I had moved him ahead of Lemon due to the draft capital fall, and then Tyson's missing half the season. So I guess he would be my 1 as of today by default. But I already had some skepticism regarding him. I wouldn't change his Dynasty outlook that much based on the preseason. Shout out my guy at Fantasy Kosh. This was Drake May's 2025 preseason stat line. 58% completion percentage, 4.8 yards per attempt, and a 37 PFF passing grade. He then went on to finish 1 vote away from winning most valuable player last year. I would not massively shape my opinion of Cam Ward going into the season based on a couple of drives in preseason, even if he has looked quite horrendous during it. If you want to, fair enough. I definitely think that if he is as bad as it looks in preseason, at least with Cam Ward, I would say that, you probably do need to get out fast because the bottom could completely drop out this year. With Carnell Tate, I wouldn't consider it to be quite the same rush. Even if Cam Ward is completely incompetent this year, we're pretty sophisticated as a dynasty market these days. Carnell Tate will, I think, have opportunities to prove whether or not he is worthy of investment going forward that is pretty independent of Cam Ward's play. Obviously, Carnell Tate could also be terrible and Cam Ward could be terrible, but I think that even if Cam Ward is so bad that Carnell Tate can't score points this year in a meaningful way, which we don't know to be the case, that I think the dynasty market will still look to, okay, well, what are his peripheral stats? And that's probably how we're going to judge him moving forward, with the expectation of they'll probably get a new quarterback if Cam Ward is truly that bad. So I wouldn't move him down more than a spot or 2 in dynasty. I'm going to do a big dynasty tiers update this week, and I won't have him in a different tier than what I had him before, or at least I don't expect to. I moved him down about a half or even half a round in my redraft rankings, though. So I have changed my outlook a little bit in 2026.
I was already low in redraft in general. I just add, the only thing I'll say on that is I think if you are rooting for Wan'Dale Robinson to get a ton of targets, then Titans dysfunction is actually totally fine with you. That's kind of how he survived, or I shouldn't even say survived. That's kind of how he thrived in New York, was regardless of what the dysfunction on this offense is, if they can't block anybody, if they can't move down the field, at least they can throw to Wan'Dale Robinson behind the sticks on every 3rd and 8. So he does get PPR points for doing that. And that is maybe like at cost the redraft angle I'm most interested in on the Titans for 2026. But yeah, I largely agree on Tate in Dynasty. I did move Tyson behind him. I initially had the two of them back to back in my wide receiver rankings. I moved Tyson right behind Tate with the hamstring injury, just because, the history of wide receivers that miss half their rookie season can't be like amazing. It can't be like a great thing. That's something I want to adjust to. But yeah, like the idea that we have to update our opinions of Tate going into the year because it looks like the Titans might be a really bad offense. So I mean, I've got news for you, buddy. We knew that back in April. That was absolutely priced into my Carnell Tate ranking in rookie drafts, in startups, just understanding, this could take a year or 2 or 3 before there's like a competent offense here that is going to immediately lead to him scoring fantasy points. And Jacob makes a good point. That is not actually that relevant for a rookie wide receivers dynasty value. Teteroa McMillan was not all that amazing for fantasy last year, but he held his value quite nicely because he looked awesome and his peripheral stats were awesome. This happened with Garrett Wilson for years and years. It happened with Drake London for years and years. Like it's plowed ground, I would say. I'm not, worried about Tate from a dynasty perspective because of how good or bad Cam Ward might be this year.
Yeah, I'm looking at it more from, again, a team where I'm definitely up there contending, wanting to score points, and very much willing to use Tate to go and get them more than I was before. Drake May's not Cam Ward, right? As a prospect and what we saw as a rookie, let's say. I don't know if my previous opinions about Cam Ward are just kind of making what I've seen so far, and then not just from me, but from other people I trust. Again, I'm not a quarterback scout. I don't think most people can do it. I think most of us are terrible at it because there are just so many moving parts to the whole thing. I don't know if it's confirmation bias. It could be, but for pure point scoring potentials, if I'm not just purely looking at the dynasty value side of that, I have no issues trying to use him to go and get somebody we know is going to, again, be a kind of a difference maker. Because, again, a lot of dynasty players just play on the value game, and I don't know. I just don't trust them on a contending team. I don't.
I mean, I don't think that it's that's fine. I guess. I don't know what his value is like now versus what it would be previously, but I don't think that the expectation ever should have been that if you're taking him at the 102 or the 103 this year, that's making a meaningful impact on your lineup anyway. Like, I mean, he's been like a round 6 redraft pick all year. He's slipping about a round in the redraft markets, but that puts him in a similar range in terms of expected contribution to your season this year as Jaylen Warren. So I don't feel like if the goal was to maximize the impact to your contending lineup this year, this is one where I do feel like the time to trade the pick was April.
So his dynasty ADP was going in and around players before players like Olave, Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall. Those are just all players that I would be trying to go and grab, right? As a point scorer with dynasty value. Even as Zay Flowers rounds later, if you can get the additional pieces on top to make that make sense, that's what I would be doing. Well, I think you could.
I just feel like the problem is I get what you're saying. You're almost treating him like, if you're a contender, Carnell Tate is actually just an extra first that I have on my roster that I can use to like go buy a player I think's going to actually score points this year. And I think that's a totally fine and valid way to look at it. But I guess it has to be a pretty specific roster for me to say it, much like it needs to be a specific roster for me to trade my 27 first, I guess. It needs to be a specific roster for me to say, no, I actually have no interest in value appreciation happening on my bench right now, and I would much rather maximize my points heading into week 1. This might be different 6 weeks from now. If I have a clearer idea of, yes, this team is a contender, it's 5-1. And Tate, I now am very certain that Tate's doing nothing for me this year. Like, I think I'm more open to what you're saying, kind of like once we've gotten into the season a little bit. Not too deep, like not so deep that it can't help you as much anymore. But yeah, just when we know a little bit more about it, also who the player is that you should be trading him away for, that you should be acquiring. I think I like to wait for a little bit more certainty, like with what I'm buying and with what my team is, before making that type of move, I'd say.
I think that's fair. I think that's a fair way to look at it. Last player to talk about before we get out of here. Jacob, you had hopes that this was going to be a Rachaad White kind of season. There's a lot of people that wanted it to be a JCM kind of season. JCM dealing with injury. White's been dealing with injury. All that kind of leading to the fat RB God having a runway moving forward. Do you fear that this backfield just ends up becoming a muddled mess?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I remain really high on this backfield. I'm like, in seasonal formats, I'm substantially overweight on literally all 3 of them. I do think there is an outcome where it's a muddled mess, I guess, but I don't think that is super likely. Part of the fun in this too is that, I guess it's not fun for them, so maybe I shouldn't say fun, but Jerome Ford is on season-ending IR. Jeremy McNichols has been projected to start the year potentially on IR. Those were guys that were pesky veterans with pass-catching chops that I'd seen some people fear-mongering about. I mean, at this point, like, I think that if the backfield has kind of narrowed itself a little bit here to White, JCM, and Kaytron. You mentioned White and JCM are both dealing with an injury. It doesn't seem like either is particularly serious. White seems to me locked into at least a pass catching role. I don't see the other 2 fulfilling that. And then, the worst case scenario, I guess, is that they split the rushing stuff evenly between JCM and Kaytron, and everyone becomes not that valuable. I personally was not that impressed with the Kaytron Allen preseason experience. I thought he looked juiceless and slow. So I put him on the sheet because I think he's going to get a lot of buzz. Most of everything that I'm hearing out of camp is that they're very impressed with JCM, particularly that they kind of want him to be the guy, that they want him to prove himself in the receiving game. That's made me a lot more interested in him. I think it's possible he does that. I think if he doesn't do that, I am still much more comfortable with White as like an all-around threat. Like, I felt like Kaytron had a chance to have a pounding drumbeat. I wouldn't say it's been that for him. So I think he's an interesting stash for sure. If you have him, you're probably excited about some of the injury stuff. He's getting reps with Jaden Daniels right now at practice. That's fantastic. But to me, I'm still targeting JCM and White first and foremost, and I think Kaytron is a stash. I also think that if Kaytron does prove me wrong, I'm guessing and I'm hoping that it comes fully at the expense of JCM, or that someone's hurt. Like, I just think that a lot of people get really afraid of 3-person backfields. I think it's very unlikely that for a sustained period of time this season, all 3 of them will be healthy and all 3 of them will have a role. I think it's going to be a 2-person backfield, or maybe even become a 1-person backfield with a clear RB2. And in that case, I still think it's a steal where you're able to get the.
Yeah, it really seems like the Commanders are hungry for what every report you hear from them. And it's always hard for me to tell when we're this late in the offseason if this is actually just a result of like a beat writer echo chamber or
sucks.
if it's legitimate.
Like the one I just watched on my screen.
The run, yeah.
That run's also sucks. A lot of these runs suck. Anyway, the preseason. I'm not trying to overreact, but I just like he got a lot of carries. Okay.
Yes, he did. That he did. What we keep hearing in this preseason is that the Commanders want
was a nice run.
They want Bill to win the job, but by win the job, they really mean we want Bill to be able to operate on passing downs so that he can just be on the field and we don't have to worry about tipping personnel. They want to run this much more like under center, play action heavy offense where the whole point is we are disguising the run and the pass and we can do either out of any look from any down and distance and all that. The reason that they seem to want Bill to win the job and to like get up to snuff in those passing situations is because he's the more explosive back in their view and probably in my view. So I do think if you play that scenario out, either way you play it out of either Bill succeeds or Bill doesn't. The Bill doesn't succeed end of that is Rachaad White is the default kind of not bell cow, but like most valuable back for fantasy, where JCM gets more of like the situational carries and doesn't have a passing game role, right? So I think either way, you're probably getting a good like fantasy producer one way or the other, or at least like a fantasy relevant producer, whichever way that gets split. It wouldn't really make sense for it to be split three ways just because it sounds like the only reason they would split it is just out of necessity. They don't want to split it. They want one guy that can not tip their personnel. So yeah, like a full-on committee doesn't really make sense to me. There's not been really any like positive words about Kaytron from the team, at least that have picked up that much traction or that have crossed my radar. So I'm not really viewing Kaytron as like he had a great preseason and this is like now, and that he's now a factor in this backfield outside of we get like an unpleasant surprise on September 8th with the with the injury report for either White or JCM or both. But yeah,
I mean, the Kaytron thing, I think it still makes sense for the reasons it made sense as a rookie draft play, which is a guy who has legitimate college volume. He's like a real boy rusher. He's plausibly a goal line type profile on a team that doesn't really have an obvious other one. And it's an ambiguous backfield. So all that stuff still applies. But everything that Ryan just said about what, per reporting, the team is looking for in their backfield doesn't really suit Kaytron that well. I mean, the two things he emphasized is they want a running back who can be an all situations player in the run and pass game. And two, they'd prefer if that player is explosive. I mean, Kaytron has no real pass game experience and is not explosive. So I find it pretty unlikely that he's going to fit either of those if those two are priorities. I guess like to Tom's earlier point, the absolute nightmare scenario is that like some point during the season, Kaytron becomes like a guy who takes 5 carries a week and 3 of them are at the goal line, and he's like an unstartable Mike Tolbert, but that who also renders the other 2 unstartable.
I was thinking more like a Sean Tucker level annoyance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of Sean Tucker, I mean, we're not on a rookie show, but that annoyance might be out of Tampa Bay soon, per report.
Yeah, saw that. And hey, we're going to talk about that on the live, which you can go back and watch when you're done watching this video. I would highly suggest doing it. I will say my favorite, with all the talk about Kaytron and you guys nailing it, they want a more explosive player who can catch passes. My favorite like back end stash player is Robert Henry right now in that backfield, because while everyone's talking about the other 3, I kind of want the guy that most people aren't discussing. And Robert Henry, 5'9", right, 196. He's at a UTSA, and I think, you know, obviously not a highly touted prospect at all, but has looked explosive. Definitely has more pass game experience than Kaytron does, and kind of feels like he fits the mold a little bit better, maybe for what they're looking for. As Ryan, what you were mentioning, not tipping plays. So we often talk about getting the handcuff wrong when it comes to being dynasty managers. I like Robert Henry. Throw his hat into the ring, into the mix. If something does happen, I feel like he can maybe more seamlessly fit that role. I am just concerned that they're going to look at Kaytron and be like, well, like we saw the first graphic we put up, people talking about, well, it hasn't lost any yards. He's not going to be a net negative for you. Might be a net negative in that he doesn't provide much, right? So I like Robert Henry. If you're looking for a sleeper or a back end of your roster stash, he's definitely somebody I want.
There's some fun stuff with Henry's profile. 4.22 yards after contact per attempt last year. That was one of the highest marks in the class. Above average in missed tackles forced as well. Like for about 5 seconds, I almost got really excited about finding a running back sleeper in the class. And then you look at the rest of the profile and you're like, oh, he played at UT San Antonio and he was like 24 years old and he has no receiving profile. But I do think he has like some legitimate juice as a rusher. So as an end of bench stash, I definitely have time for Bob Henry.
Good old Bob Henry. All right, that's going to do it for this show. Every week we're going to be breaking down a rookie report, so stay locked in. If you have questions about a rookie that's been trending, you want to know our opinions, don't worry. We got you covered every single week here on Dynasty Points with the rookie report. Stay locked in, and as I mentioned before, you're going to want to go back and check out the live. We talk about more veteran type situations like the Tampa Bay backfield, news coming out of that. This episode, we're going to be talking about the kind of more feverishly talked about than expected Raiders wide receiver camp battle, which I didn't realize had as strong opinions as there are out there, but we're going to talk about that this week, so go back, check that out, and of course, stay for 5 for 5. Not going to miss that either. For Jakob Sanderson, for Ryan Heath, I'm Thomas Tipple. This is Dynasty Points. Remember that clear eyes and full hearts can never lose, and that your best days are always spent tilting. We'll see you next time.